So a key strategy that can be very helpful when you are working one-on-one with clients is this concept of motivational interviewing. And this is not just for coaches or counselors, but this can be really effective for doctors or physiotherapists or other healthcare practitioners that are trying to get or ideally want their clients or patients to change in some way that's going to ameliorate their health. So I love the concept of motivational interviewing, and you'll see in the readings there's also another video that gives you an actual example of some of the strategies of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing, like we've said before, assumes that motivation is not something you can give someone. And motivation isn't a trait, it's something we just kind of have in ourselves that we can bring to the surface with the right kind of situation. And a counselor facilitates this, okay? It's collaborative, it's evocative, it brings it out of the person, and it honors that patient or that client and their own situation, their own individuality, okay? So one of the things that we focus on in motivational interviewing as well is this concept of ambivalence, like I don't want to, like I don't really care. That's kind of ambivalence. And the reason there is ambivalence with physical activity or eating fruits and vegetables or whatever else behavior is that, and we've talked about this before, there's a price to these things. Right? There's a cost to these things. There's a cost to exercising. There's a cost to eating fruits and vegetables. Okay, so in motivational interviewing, what we try to do is bring to consciousness these trade-offs. Okay, there's costs, but there's also benefits. And can we tip the scales in favor of the benefits? So the benefits outweigh the costs, but that the patient really believes or the client really believes that the benefits outweighs the cost, that they find that in themselves. Okay, so key aspects of motivational interviewing, which is abbreviated MI here, is about reflective listening. And that's why we talked about in the last module, those active listening skills. Okay, and how it's important to really just shut your own damn mind off and the chatter in your own mind and really focus on listening to what that person has to say. Okay, elicit change talk. Change talk is about this kind of talk where we're like moving towards actually changing the behavior. You know, so you said that you're interested in being active, but you have said that there are these barriers to that as well. What do you think is going to help you lower those barriers or really help you engage in that behavior? Okay, so we're trying to focus more on what's going to get you to change. That's what we're focusing on. What's really going to lead you to a change. Okay, and there is some advice and information sharing as well, but when it's necessary, not just like as the foundation. Okay, so I want you to go through this yourself and do the readings yourself as well, but this goes over what we call the ORS model of motivational interviewing. So open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summarizations. So we've already talked about pretty much all of these things except for affirmations. So open-ended questions are really, like we said, open-ended questions. So not yes or no questions, but like, how do you feel about this? What's been your past experience with this? Tell me about what's going on in your life right now. Those are open-ended questions. And when that person is speaking, we want to ideally give them affirmations to keep them speaking and to develop that rapport and to develop that sense of ease in that person as well. So I appreciate that it took a lot of courage for you to discuss your drinking with me today. Okay, it's affirming that this isn't easy. It's affirming that, like, I really appreciate you sharing this with me. Something I say to people is I really appreciate how vulnerable you are with me right now. That's not easy to do, and I just like, I want to say that I appreciate that very dearly. Okay, so that affirms that, you know, we're so scared of sharing with other people because we've been judged before, because we've been taken advantage of before. Right? So part of this is trying to, again, create that safe space where that person feels comfortable sharing. Okay? In the last section, we talked about reflections, where we reflect back maybe the meaning or the feeling or what that person actually said as well. Okay, and then summarizing. And like we said, this typically goes in at the end of a session. So we're like, this is what we talked about today. These are some of the things you said that are things you want to change. And you also said that these are the things that are holding you back. But you said also that we talked also about how you want to tip in favor of this by doing that. Okay, and then in a week, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about this again, but this is the main thing you said you wanted to work on this week. Does that sound okay? Anything else you want to add? Okay, so again, it's about like really reflecting on what's happening and helping that person kind of have those take-home messages. Okay, something else that we often see with this concept of motivational interviewing is this readiness ruler. So you could actually use this ruler itself. But this kind of speaks into that concept of the stages of change model as well, and how ready are people to change too. And ideally, as a health promoter, what we want to do is like move them in favor, get them from a 2 to a 4, or a 4 to a 6, or a 6 to an 8, as far as their readiness to change. Okay, so that's something else. In some styles of motivational interviewing, that's one of the main kind of areas they focus on, is how ready are you to actually change. Okay, so general format for an MI session: opening statement where you're like, thank you for being here today. Just want to give you a little bit of an intro so you understand what we're doing here. I'm Deanna Bedoya. I am a registered clinical counselor, and we're here today to talk about this. I want you to know that anything you say today, I'm not going to repeat to anyone else. It's completely between you and I, unless there is a chance of harm for yourself or someone else. Okay, and then I'm legally obligated to say something about it. But outside of that, this stays completely between you and I. Okay, so just kind of setting the foundation and building that rapport. Okay, and then during the session, again, we want to focus towards change talk, focus on the health-related behavior. So sometimes it's actually steering someone back. Some people can go off topic, but steering them back to the topic at hand. If information is needed, we provide that. Okay, and then we might also want to use this readiness ruler, which we talked about in the last one. Okay, and then like we said, at the end, you summarize. But during the session, you're going to be using open-ended questions, or you're going to use affirmations, and you're going to be using reflecting as well. Okay, so some other things to mention about motivational interview: it's very empathy focused. One of our main goals is to develop discrepancy, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. You don't want to argue or confront your client. This isn't an intervention. This is really about providing a safe space where that person can come up with their own answers. Okay? If resistance happens, and we'll talk about this in a second as well, you want to not ideally confront or argue with that person, but roll with it, reframe it, see where we can make a difference in what we can, and ideally help that person build their self-efficacy too, something we've talked about in previous units. Okay? So I mentioned this concept of discrepancy, which is also called dissonance. And dissonance or discrepancy is like, I want to be here, but I'm here. So I want to be an active person, or I want to quit smoking, but my behaviors aren't there yet. Okay, so there's a discrepancy between where I want to be and where I am, or the action, and there's a belief. Okay, so I maybe want to be active, but I think physical activity sucks. Okay, there's a discrepancy there. Okay, and ideally with motivational interviewing, we're trying to narrow that discrepancy, that dissonance, so the belief in the action, or the current action and the desired action, those align. Okay, so discrepancy is an inconsistency in the beliefs one holds, or between one's actions and one's beliefs. And this discrepancy or dissonance, it's uncomfortable. You know, I want to be doing this, but I believe this other thing. Okay, so the mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values at the same time. Okay, so I believe that physical activity is good for me, but I also believe that physical activity sucks. There's a discrepancy there, and those aren't going to be aligned. So ideally with motivational interviewing, we highlight that. So you said that you believe this, but you also believe that. Is there a way we can reconcile those things? Or how do you think that's getting in the way of you progressing? And those are some of the questions we might want to ask. Okay. So when discrepancy happens, you believe this, but you also believe that, and this is unaligned. When we bring this to light, it can lead to denial. It can also lead to a decrease in self-efficacy or self-esteem. It's just be like, I know, I suck at this, or I'm just not good in general. We don't want that to happen. Some people might ideally change their beliefs to align with the behavior a little bit more, which is, it's okay if that means with the new behavior, but we don't ideally want them to change their beliefs to align with the old behavior. And ideally, we want to change their behavior to align with their beliefs. So they believe physical activity is good, but they're not actually doing that. Okay, so we want to change the behavior to align with that belief that it's good. Okay, so like we said, resistance can happen when we show dissonance, which we show there's a difference between what you want and what you believe and what's actually going on right now. So resistance indicates that, so if someone's like, I don't want to talk about this anymore, this frustrates me, this is like, ugh, I'm just like, I suck. This shows that we need to change our strategy. That whatever we're just doing isn't probably going to work. We can also reframe what they're saying in a way that it actually promotes this change as well. And we can ideally help to reframe so people see things in a more positive way. We don't want to dismiss people and say that's a stupid belief, okay, or that's a stupid way of being. We don't want to do that. But can we reframe things? So for instance, if someone says, I just can't do multiple choice exams, you don't want to reframe by this. Reframing isn't saying, yes, I can see that. That's not reframing. Sure, you can. They're easy. That's not reframing. You sound frustrated and upset. That's reflecting. That's not reframing. So reframing could be, so far you haven't found a strategy that works. But because in the past you have done well on multiple choice exams, that there are strategies that do work. Okay, I suck at exercise. Well, so far you haven't found an exercise that you enjoy doing, but one does exist. Okay, so again, reframing it so it looks a little bit different. Another way thing of reframing, I saw it drawn out like this. Like sometimes people, they see their world and they just see everything kind of like they see smoke. They see smoke and like just everything's dark and ugly, but they're just looking at part of the picture. And if we were to reframe and look at the larger picture, we would see, yeah, that smoke is part of a building, but there's also some trees over here. There's also a sun over here. There's also some grass. There's some smiling children. Here are children. Obviously, I'm not a very good drawer. But if you're just looking at this, everything looks dark and ugly. But if we can reframe and look at more of the positive side of things, that can help people, be more incentivized to actually change as well. Okay, so read through all the information on motivational interviewing. And ideally, I want you to be able to do this with your own clients. And with our assignment, you also might get a chance to practice this skill as well. But practice it with your friends, practice it with your family, and ideally develop these skills because it's going to be very helpful if you are working one-on-one with people.